wellness revolution starts now.
Welcome to the program. Today, we're going to be talking about all things related to the gut and getting your gut healthy, particularly using probiotics in a very strategic manner. And for those of you who may not have had a chance to hear about Dr. Davis's work, I'm going to be incorporating a fair amount of his ideas in what we talk about, but we're going to be expanding the topic to include all the things you want to think about with your lifestyle, with your diet, to actually get your gut healthy. And what's interesting is that if you think back on what doctors said about the GI tract and just being healthy in general 10, 20 years ago, the gut didn't come up except for getting a colonoscopy and doing screening tests typically. It wasn't thought of as being the hub for getting healthy. Of course, now it's kind of hard not to hear people talking about this because it's been so widely recognized. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got into the mess we got into with our gut. It's interesting. We actually, as the food industry, can add things to what we consume, and they themselves determine whether it's safe or not. You've probably seen the designation grass generally recognized as safe. And what's rather shocking is that the industry actually decides themselves whether what they put in the food is okay. So, you think about the fox guarding the henhouse situation. They themselves can say, we looked at a few studies, it looked fine to us. And there's no third party checking it out. What that amounts to is in our country, but not most of the world, we can add the food industry, I should say, can add virtually anything they want to food. And until it's proved to be a problem by someone else and a fuss is made about it, it stays in the food. Now, as we have the Make America Healthy movement going, I'm hoping that'll change, but it's not going to be immediate. So we need to be looking out for what we consume in food, particularly food we didn't make from scratch, which is really the key thing to be healthy is getting your own food and making it at home. And I know that most of us don't like that solution because we like the idea of taking out our spouse, taking out our family, getting together with other people, and doing so in a venue that allows us to focus on the relationship and not on the meal preparation process. Unfortunately, there's not a great plan B, and it's very fascinating that these foods have really altered our gut, and these additives are really throwing us off. So processed foods in general are a big part of the problem, because we need a healthy mucosal barrier to be healthy. And we often talk in the functional medicine world about the importance of not having leaky gut and having good tight junctions. These tight junctions basically allow us to keep what's supposed to be in the gut, and not getting into our bloodstream. Unfortunately, most of us have a problem in that area because of all these additives and the dysbiosis, the imbalance in our bacteria. Those are two of the major factors. We also need to keep our gut moving, and a lot of folks have a sluggish gut. It might be hypothyroidism, which is something we address a lot in our practice. It could even be things that we're doing to ourselves. For example, a lot of people are taking weight loss medications, which is a part of their mechanism of action, actually slow the gut from moving. I'm talking about the GLP-1 agonists like semaglutide, which some people report some positives with that. But one of the big negatives, along with muscle loss, is the fact that things move slower through your gut, and that allows the bacteria to pile up, and they're more likely to cause problems. And that's just one of the aspects to think about. The absorption capacity in our gut needs to be where it needs. We have to be able to break things down. Our stomach has to make enough acid. A lot of us don't make enough acid. Our pancreas has to make the digestive enzymes. And the digestive process occurs largely in the small intestine, which has not really gotten enough attention, whereas most of the bacteria, number-wise, are in the large intestine or colon. And it's interesting that as we've learned more about the importance of the small intestine being healthy, we now know that most of us are missing the key bacteria that we need for it to be healthy. And I want to talk more about some of those keystone bacterial strains like L.Reuteri that we can not only take as a supplement, but actually ferment into a yogurt and improve our health. But many of us are undermining our health without realizing it by doing things like eating these processed foods. And I wanted to enumerate some of the problems that we get into. Did you ever read the fine print of things and it says emulsifiers? If you ever wonder, what is an emulsifier there for? It's usually there to improve the texture. It's added to things like mayonnaise, it's added to ice cream. And these emulsifiers emulsify the layer in our gut, the mucin layer, and actually cause direct damage. That's like polysorbate 80 and carrageenan. And these things are everywhere. And if you're not looking out for it, you'll think to yourself, well, I don't eat that bad. And you'll wonder why your gut's not as healthy as you want it to be. And this would be one of those reasons. I've also noticed that a lot of us people trying to lose weight often don't realize they're consuming artificial sweeteners that will undermine their health. And these artificial sweeteners might be aspartame, it might be sucralose, but these actually change the profile of the bacteria in our gut and can actually cause weight gain, the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. And they cause dysbiosis. And this dysbiosis is something that you won't be able to correct just by taking a probiotic. And I wish it weren't so, but we really do have to be eliminating these from our diet. Another interesting tool that we have to watch out for, or issue that we have to watch out for, is what we drink. A lot of us, alcohol actually, unfortunately, is hard on our gut and hard on our health. And you might say, well, I'll just drink water. If you don't drink the right water, you can get into trouble because tap water, chlorine, fluoride, it's also got all the trace chemicals that are in municipal water. So anything above tap water is an improvement, but I'd recommend a high-grade filter to really get the stuff out that you don't want to be drinking. And a lot of people think, well, I'll just drink bottled water. Well, you've probably heard about the problem with plastics. We have way too much plastics in our diet, and eliminating the plasticizers can really be useful. What I've noticed, though, is that if you're looking for a shortcut, there really isn't one. So just get your mind around the fact that we need to be, and I wish it weren't so, again, because I'm talking to myself as well, we need to be making most of our own food, ideally organic, drinking clean water. And let's talk about some positive things we can do to get our gut healthy. There are some things we can do to actually enhance things like Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a key bacteria for keeping our layer really healthy in our gut, the mucin layer. And we can keep that healthy by adding polyphenol-rich foods. That could be a lot of our fruits like pomegranate, but a simple way to do that is drinking some green tea. Green tea naturally will feed that bacteria, as well as fiber-rich foods. And one of my concerns about doing a pure carnivore type approach is that you're not going to feed your good bacteria very well. So I would encourage you, if you're more inclined to eat that way, is to include some fiber-rich foods in it. Don't go 100% having just meat products, animal products, because you do want to feed these good bacteria or else you'll lose them. And stress reduction can help as well. A lot of us use that phrase and we say, work on your stress. And we're like, well, how do you do that in a stressful world? One easy way to do that is just to do all the things that relax you, whether it's walking, connecting with friends, prayer, reading, avoiding the stressors that you know about. But I did want to mention something that I find intriguing, and that's vagal nerve stimulation, because this directly affects your gut health. If you stimulate the vagus nerve, which is located and goes from the brainstem all the way down to your abdominal area, if you stimulate the vagus nerve, it actually helps reduce the leakiness of your gut and helps enhance a good balance in your gut. And this is something you can do by singing, humming. There's some manual stimulation devices you can use. There's actually some great tools that you can purchase that will stimulate the vagus nerve either by going through the ear or directly in this area. And I've been recommending those more these days because anything that reduces your sympathetic overdrive helps. And you've probably heard that most of us tend to be overly stressed, and that looks like the fight or flight part of our sympathetic nervous system is overly active compared to the parasympathetic side. So something as simple as stimulating your vagus nerve could be tremendously helpful. And I found one device that's just 2 minutes twice a day That's all it takes, and that can actually improve your situation dramatically, reducing stress, improving your sleep, improving your mood. Now, the things you can do, and Akkermansia can be taken as a supplement, but that doesn't seem to be nearly as helpful as actually promoting your own growth of it by drinking green tea and avoiding the processed foods that will undermine your good balance. Now, L.Reuteri, I never heard of until a couple of years ago. Lactobacillus reuteri is something that 96% of us are missing. And because it's missing in the American, it's in really most developed world, we don't have this particular strain of bacteria that leaves us very vulnerable to something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. SIBO is the abbreviation for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I used to think of that as being a fairly uncommon condition that you would only have in a rare occasion, and we would often use very powerful antibiotics that would knock out the bacteria. But it would usually come back because the underlying reason for those bacteria overgrowing was not addressed. And it turns out it's not that complex to figure out how to balance that. What we want to do is have our gut as healthy as possible and put in the bacteria that our small intestine likes to have. And in a nutshell, it likes to have the lactobacillus, it likes to have the bifidobacterium, which are gram-positive fragile bacteria that make things that actually drive the bad bacteria back to the colon. And that does wonders for our health. In fact, most of the issues that occur in our body that are harmful, whether it's getting cancer or dementia or heart disease, are related to inflammation. And a major driver of that inflammation is the fact that we're making toxins in our body, specifically our gut, that get into our bloodstream. And the way it does so is through the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth route and a leaky gut. And you pair those together, and again, this is common, you get these bacteria going from the colon into the small intestine, crossing over into our bloodstream. And that inflammation doesn't necessarily cause any pain. We may not even see it reflected in blood work. But I have noticed that a lot of people will tell me that they eat perfectly. They're doing everything right. They're doing some intermittent fasting. They're dealing with their stress. They don't eat any processed foods. They limit their simple carbohydrates. They're not eating out frequently. They're, not buying processed foods. They make it all at home. Yet their blood sugar numbers don't look perfect. Well, a reason for that is endotoxemia from small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that can be challenging to reverse. But I love Dr. Davis's simple idea of making a yogurt with some compounds that will reverse that. He called it SIBO yogurt, and it's really not just one recipe, but there's a combination of several things that you can add. And he describes this in his book, Super Gut. And it's a mixture of 3 probiotics that you ferment for a long time, like 36 hours. And after they've fermented for 36 hours, you go from fairly low numbers to enormously high numbers. You can get in half a cup of yogurt about 300 billion of these good bacteria, and you'll never see this much in the capsules that you would buy, which is why the yogurt's so helpful. And if you eat that regularly, it'll actually transform your gut over time, pushing these gram-negative organisms like E. coli, and there's others, Klebsiella, back into the large intestine, giving your gut a chance to heal. And with that, you'll no longer have the toxins crossing into your bloodstream. And that can dramatically improve our health. And some people know they have a problem with their gut because they don't feel well. They have gas, they have bloating, they have reflux. But you could also have milder degrees of SIBO and actually think you're fine as far as your gut health goes. And I've noticed that a lot of people, when they start killing off these bacteria in the small intestine by taking the yogurt, they'll start feeling better. But you could actually sometimes feel a little bit worse because of the die-off that can occur when you start killing these. And you have to actually slow down that process sometimes so that your body can have a chance to adjust and not make you feel under the weather in terms of bloating or nausea. But this is one of my favorite tools for health because it empowers you to do something that previously you would actually have to see a GI doctor, get a bunch of expensive tests done, but you can actually make this at home. And it's cost effective because you can actually make your next batch, in many cases, just from taking a little bit of your previous batch to make the next one. Like a couple of tablespoons, combine it with a little bit of a prebiotic, like some inulin, a couple of tablespoons of organic inulin, and then the previous batch, and wait 36 hours, and then you have more yogurt. This is a tasty way to dramatically reduce your risk of heart disease, of dementia, of cancer, of all the degenerative problems that we don't want to have, because they're all related to inflammation. And we can actually reverse that with something this simple. Now, a lot of folks get overwhelmed by the idea of making yogurt. And I like the idea of at least knowing how to make the simplest version of it, which is just take L.Reuteri and ferment it for 36 hours at about 100 degrees with a couple of tablespoons of inulin. And if you use organic half and half, it really makes it easy. And that's all you really need. And you can get MyReuteri as one of the sources for the L.Reuteri that Dr. Davis recommends. There's actually 3 different strains you can use, but you do want to be strain specific when it comes to these organisms, because the details actually do matter. And you may remember that there were some outbreaks of E. coli occasionally when there's food poisoning and people could get really sick. Well, E. coli normally doesn't do that. It only happens if it's that specific strain. So just as there are okay strains of E. coli and harmful strains of E. coli, there are strains of L.Reuteri that are more beneficial than others. So the details do matter in this point. And L.Reuteri, by the way, helps with a lot of things that you may not even associate with gut health. It actually helps you feel more relaxed, more empathetic. And it does that in part by raising your oxytocin levels. And some people have found that when they consume this regularly, they find themselves better understanding other people's point of view. Even if they disagree with it, they can see their point of view better. And that's a good thing. Muscle strength. It's strange, but animal models show this as well as human studies. People can often get stronger muscles just by consuming L.Reuteri. And that sounds almost unbelievable that you can eat a yogurt, or even just take the probiotic, but it's more powerful if you make the yogurt, and get stronger muscles. Testosterone levels go up in both men and women, and it's not uncommon for people to report that their libido improves when they add L.Reuteri. You might also sleep better, in part because of the oxytocin increase. And skin health. Skin health often improves. Collagen production goes up significantly with long-term consumption of L.Reuteri. And this is without taking extra collagen or biotin. Those things can be useful as well. But this literally can make your skin look healthier, younger. Just think of what happens to your body if you're increasing your muscle mass, your skin's getting healthier. That alone would make you look better. But the great thing about this is it's not just looking better, you're literally getting healthier. The more muscle we have and the less fat we have, generally the better, right? And you can reshape your body slowly over time by adding this super gut yogurt. L.Reuteri is one of the, I think everybody's going to know that word before too long, because the word's getting out there that it really does matter, but it's not as hard as a lot of people think. When people read Dr. Davis's book, they sometimes get confused as to which recipe to use and exactly how to do it. But it can be just as simple as taking 1 or 2 capsules of a probiotic with the right strains of L.Reuteri in them. And in addition to MyReuteri, by the way, you can use a company called BioGaia. They make a product called Gastrus, which is a tablet. It actually is fairly weak, so you have to use about 10 of those in your original batch, crushing them up and mixing them together, or 1 or 2 capsules of their product called Os Fortis, which, by the way, it's named Os Fortis, which is Latin for bone strong bones, because it actually reduces bone loss. And again, who knew you could actually have stronger bones and stronger muscle by just taking more of a particular probiotic, L.Reuteri? It really is that effective. And people find that when they regularly consume this, they often have less bloating. They are more regular in their movements. And those are some of the kind of niceties that can occur. But it really is one of the best ways to reverse chronic disease, by reversing leaky gut and endotoxemia, the absorption of the toxins from our gut. So as you're thinking about being healthy, You don't want to overlook some of the most simple things that we have, which are the good bacteria in our body. And it's not widely appreciated that we actually have far more bacteria in our colon, in our GI tract, than there are cells in our own body. So if we don't take care of this part of our body, it really does have a dramatic impact on our health. And so many of the people who think that they have an anxiety problem, they don't have an anxiety problem because of their brain. They have an anxiety problem because of their gut. And similarly, they might have trouble concentrating for the same reason, or depression for the same reason, or insomnia, or they might be having problems that are related to inflammation, and it might be related to their heart health. And so what I love about treating these issues is that we're getting to the root. And so if you're struggling with your health, let me just encourage you to not overlook the basics. L.Reuteri is a wonderful tool. You can increase your Akkermansia muciniphila by as simple as drinking green tea in the context of eating healthy, which is largely avoiding processed foods, artificial sweeteners, additives, tap water, alcohol, and taking care of yourself, getting enough sleep, exercising, also making sure that you do everything possible to reduce stress, which may include the vagal nerve stimulation. And with this, you can transform your gut and transform your health. Thank you for listening.
At Physicians Preference Pharmacy, we believe that prescription drugs are commonly overprescribed, treating symptoms only rather than addressing the underlying condition. These drugs offer a temporary fix, but they don't solve the root cause of the problem. Our approach is not about overloading people with medications that offer only a temporary fix. It is so important to recognize that you do not get sick because you have a low level of pharmaceutical drugs in your blood. You get sick because you are deficient in something or because your body is not in balance. As part of your healthcare team, we work with your doctor to restore that healthy balance. Sometimes this means replacing hormones, vitamins, nutrients, or even antioxidants. So how is this different than traditional treatment? Rather than covering up the symptoms with yet another medication, we work to replenish the body, restoring your health and restoring your wellness.
Information provided on this program is neither intended nor implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice and is not intended to replace the services of a physician, nor does it constitute a doctor-patient relationship. You should not use information from this radio program to diagnose or treat a health problem or disease without consulting with a qualified healthcare provider. If you have or suspect you have an urgent medical problem, promptly contact a professional healthcare provider or call 911. Dr. Hotze's Wellness Revolution advises you to always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider prior to starting any new treatment or with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Any application of the recommendations from this program is at the listener's discretion.